Hey everyone, ready to jump into the world of energy? We're going to take a deep dive into the International Energy Agency's World Energy Outlook 2024 report today.
Yeah.
It's basically like our crystal ball for understanding where energy is headed.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one this year. So much going on. It covers, well, everything really. Projections for oil demand, the rise of renewables, the whole shebang. Oh, and it even goes deep into China's dominance in the clean energy space, which I know you were interested in.
Yeah, definitely. That's a big one. Okay, so before we go too deep, maybe just like a quick overview for everyone. So the report uses these three scenarios: stated policies, that's step ES, announced pledges, APS, and then net zero emissions, NZE. They're like, I don't know, alternate futures, showing us what happens depending on how we deal with climate change.
Exactly. Like pick your own adventure, but for the whole planet, right? So step ACES is like the business as usual path. If we just stick with what we're doing now. APS includes all those big promises countries have made to cut emissions. And then NZE, that's the ideal scenario, but it's definitely the most challenging, where we actually get to net zero by 2050.
Okay, so let's start with like the current reality check. The report says that global energy demand increased by 2% in 2023. But here's the thing. 2/3 of that came from, you guessed it, fossil fuels, specifically coal and oil.
Yeah, that's I guess you could call it a bit of a wake-up call. Shows just how big of a challenge this is. Like, even with all the progress in renewables, we're still super reliant on fossil fuels to, keep the lights on, especially in those rapidly growing economies. They're the ones driving that demand increase.
Which is why it's so important to invest in clean energy in those places, right? Not just so they can have enough energy, but to stop emissions from, like, going crazy in the future.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If they follow the same fossil fuel heavy path that we did in developed countries, it's going to be really hard to hit those climate goals.
Right. Like we're trying to change a tire on a moving car.
Pretty much.
And speaking of tricky situations, the report talks a lot about all the like geopolitical stuff happening right now. Feels like every week there's an election that could change energy policies around the world.
Oh, for sure. It's a super volatile time, makes it really hard to plan for the long term. And then you've got the war in Ukraine and all the tension in the Middle East, just constant reminders of how fragile the whole energy system is.
And remember how Europe and Asia had to scramble for oil when the war started? The report says they're even more reliant on the Middle East now, so that adds another layer of complexity to everything.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough balancing act. Trying to keep the lights on while also moving to cleaner sources. And all this against a backdrop of, shifting alliances and potential conflicts.
Okay, and then there's the big one, China. They're like the clean energy superpower right now. They control so much of the manufacturing and processing for solar panels, batteries, those critical minerals, you name it.
Right, they're kind of in a unique position. They've been huge in making those technologies cheaper, which means more people can access them, so that's good. But it does raise concerns about, supply chain issues, like what happens if things get tense politically, or if there are environmental problems in those mining regions. It's a lot of reliance on one place.
Yeah, no wonder the U.S. and the EU are working so hard to diversify their supply chains.
Yeah.
It's not just about economics anymore, it's national security too.
Exactly, the report's really clear about that. Relying on just one country for those essential parts of the clean energy transition could become a big weakness.
Okay, so we've got rising energy demand, we've got geopolitical uncertainty, and then we've got China's huge presence in the clean energy world. Now let's bring those scenarios back into the mix.
Okay, so the STEPS scenario, that's the do-nothing one, basically. The report says under that scenario, global temperatures will likely rise by 2.4 degrees Celsius by 2100.
Wow, that's scary. That's way more than, what scientists say is safe. But if countries stick to their pledges, the APS scenario, things look a bit better?
Yeah. In that case, the temperature rise is limited to 1.7 degrees. Still not great, but it shows that those commitments, if they actually happen, could make a difference.
And then we have the NZD scenario, our best shot at limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. But that's going to require some serious changes, right?
Yeah, big time. We're talking about completely changing the energy system, moving away from fossil fuels really fast, and massively increasing renewables.
So how does all this actually play out in terms of what powers our homes, our industries, everything? Let's start with the bad news first. What's the future looking like for fossil fuels?
Yeah, the report doesn't really try to make it sound better than it is. It says fossil fuels are, on the way out, that's for sure. The big question is how quickly that happens and how smoothly we can make that transition.
Right. Makes sense. So let's break it down by fuel, shall we? Coal first. What's the outlook there?
Well, it looks like global coal demand will probably peak around 2025. But here's the interesting thing. There are like two opposite forces at play. You've got countries like China, India, Southeast Asia, where coal is still a big deal. They're still developing, so coal is, it's cheap, it's available.
Right. But then you have places like the EU, the US, where they're actively phasing it out.
Exactly. So it's this like tug of war between needing energy for development and, trying to act on climate change. The report says that even in the STEPS scenario, the business as usual one, coal use in power generation starts going down in most places by 2030.
Okay, so there's hope for the end of coal, even if it takes a bit longer than we'd like. So what's taking its place as it gets phased out?
Well, the report highlights the pretty amazing growth of renewables, especially solar. It's actually cheaper to build a new solar farm than a new coal plant in most of the world now. And that cost advantage, well, it's only going to get bigger as the technology keeps improving.
Wow, that's kind of incredible when you think about it. I remember reading that China's been adding solar capacity like crazy. They're really leading the way there.
Oh, yeah, they are. And the report says that'll continue, with solar basically leading the pack in terms of renewable growth globally.
Feels like solar is going to be the workhorse of the clean energy transition,
Yeah.
at least when it comes to electricity. But what about transportation? Can't really plug our cars into the sun, can we?
True. But the report looks at how clean energy is changing that sector too. Electric vehicles are, they're getting more and more popular every day. And even heavy-duty transport like trucks and ships, they're looking into alternatives like hydrogen and biofuels.
I've got to say, I'm kind of obsessed with EVs. The whole idea of a stylish car that's good for the planet is pretty cool. But the report also mentions some of the roadblocks, like not enough charging stations, and the whole issue of sourcing those critical minerals for batteries.
Yeah, those are definitely real concerns. If we want people to actually switch to EVs, we need to make sure they can charge them easily, especially on those long trips. And those minerals like lithium, cobalt, nickel, they're essential, but mining them can have environmental and social impacts. The report really emphasizes how important it is to make sure those supply chains are ethical and sustainable.
Right. It's like we're building this whole new system around clean energy, from manufacturing to infrastructure, even to consumer behavior. It's a huge change, and it's exciting to see the progress, but it's definitely not going to be easy.
For sure. No easy answers here. The report also talks about the need for more innovation in things like carbon capture and storage, CCS, and hydrogen production. Those are technologies that could help us decarbonize those, what do they call them, the hard-to-abate sectors, like making steel or cement, stuff that's really hard to electrify.
So even though solar and wind are, kind of the stars of the show, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. We need a whole bunch of different clean energy technologies to deal with all these different challenges.
Exactly. And the report makes that point really clear. There's no single path to a clean energy future. We need a plan that takes into account, regional differences, technology advancements, and of course, how affordable everything is.
Which brings us back to those scenarios. They paint such different pictures of what the energy world could look like, depending on what we do today.
Right. So let's just recap quickly. The STEPS scenario, that's the one where we basically keep doing what we're doing now. And, that leads to a much warmer planet by the end of the century. Not ideal.
Definitely not. Then there's APS, where countries actually stick to those promises they made about cutting emissions. It gets us closer, but we still need to really speed things up.
Yeah, for sure. And then the last one, the NZE scenario, that's where we actually hit net zero by 2050. But to get there, we need a level of global cooperation and, ambition that we haven't really seen before. It's going to take trillions of dollars invested in clean energy, the right policies, and really fast technological innovation.
Sounds like a tall order.
Yeah.
But the report says it's possible. The question is, do we actually have the will to make it happen? It all comes down to the choices we make as individuals and as a global community.
That's it. You got it. The World Energy Outlook is basically a roadmap showing us the different paths we can take and, what might happen on each one. It's up to us to decide what kind of future we want.
Heady stuff.
Yeah.
But there's even more, right? The report also looks at the whole geopolitical side of the clean energy transition. Things like energy security, access to those critical minerals, and even the potential for conflict. We'll get into all that in part 3, so stick around for the final chapter of our deep dive into the IEA's World Energy Outlook 2024. All right, we're back for the last part of our deep dive into the IEA's World Energy Outlook 2024. We've covered like the big trends, the different scenarios, all those cool new technologies. But now I want to zoom out a bit, look at the bigger picture. Like, how is this whole clean energy transition changing the global power dynamics,
Yeah, this is where things get really, I guess you could say strategic. The report really stresses how energy security, it's not just about having enough oil and gas anymore. It's about navigating this world where like clean energy supply chains, access to those critical minerals, those are the new battlegrounds.
We talked about this before, but the report really hammers home how vulnerable those clean energy supply chains are. Honestly, it's a little bit scary, especially when you consider that China still controls so much of the game.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Even with the US and EU trying to diversify, the report's saying that this concentration of critical mineral production in just a few places, well, it's probably going to stick around at least until 2030. So the question is, how do we manage that reliance without creating new problems,
It's almost like we're trading one dependency for another, right? We move away from fossil fuels, which is great for the climate, but then we become reliant on a few countries for the stuff we need to build this clean energy future.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the thing is, it's not just about climate change anymore. It's about economic competitiveness and who's leading in technology. Countries are starting to realize that whoever controls these clean energy supply chains, well, they're going to have a lot of power in this century.
It's like a high-stakes game of chess with everyone trying to get ahead. The report actually calls out the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act and the EU's Net Zero Industry Act as examples of this. They're both putting billions into domestic manufacturing, trying to boost their own clean energy industries.
Yeah, it's a bit of a, I guess you could call it a clean energy arms race. And it's not just governments, right? Companies are investing like crazy too, trying to get their piece of this market that's growing so fast.
Right, makes sense. And talking about getting resources, the report also digs into the whole critical mineral situation. Looks like demand for some minerals like copper and lithium, well, it's probably going to outpace supply. That sounds like a recipe for price spikes and shortages down the road.
It's definitely something to keep an eye on. We need to ramp up production of those minerals big time to meet the demand from all these clean energy technologies. But there are challenges for sure. The report mentions things like cost inflation, prices going up and down, and even consumers not wanting to pay more for materials that are sourced ethically,
It's tough. We need a secure and reliable supply chain, but we also need to make sure these clean energy technologies are still affordable for everyone.
Right, exactly. Which brings up a really important question. How do we encourage those new mineral supply chains to develop in a way that, benefits everyone? It can't just be about making as much money as possible. It has to be about a fair and equitable transition.
It seems like everything about this energy transition is so multifaceted. It's not just a tech challenge. It's geopolitical, it's economic, it's everything.
Absolutely. And the report really emphasizes that we need countries to work together, to cooperate, to figure all this out. We need them to share knowledge, coordinate their policies, and work together to build those supply chains that are, sustainable and ethical. Otherwise, we risk just repeating the same mistakes we made with fossil fuels, all that competition and conflict.
It's a call for a more collaborative approach where countries see each other as partners in this, not rivals.
Exactly. The energy transition is a global challenge, so we need global solutions. And that kind of brings us back to the main point of this whole report. It's a roadmap showing us where energy is headed, the choices we have, the potential problems, and all the amazing opportunities.
It's been an eye-opening deep dive for sure. What's the one thing that really stuck with you from all this?
That's a good question. I think it's the realization that this transition, it's not just about swapping out fossil fuels for renewables. It's about changing how we think about energy, embracing innovation and building a future that's not just sustainable, but also more just and fair for everyone.
I love that it's not just about technology, it's about building a better world. This report has given us a lot to think about. Which scenario do you think is most likely? What role do you see yourself playing in all this? Those questions that we all need to consider.
Couldn't agree more. The IEA has given us the information. Now it's up to us to actually do something with it.
Well said. For those who want to go even deeper, check out the IEA website. They have a full report there, plus tons of other resources.
Yeah, definitely worth a look. It's more important than ever to stay informed about these energy trends and how they affect the whole world. That's the first step to creating the future we want.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the IEA's World Energy Outlook 2024. It's been fascinating. Until next time, stay curious.